This is the L3 Leadership Podcast, episode number 142. What's up, everyone, and welcome to episode number 142 of the L3 Leadership Podcast. My name is Doug Smith, and I'm the founder of L3 Leadership. We're a leadership development company devoted to helping you become the best leader that you can be. In this episode, you're going to get to hear an interview I had with Sarah Keller, who's the executive director of Next Level Church in Fort Myers, Florida. You may recognize the name of the church because we've also interviewed her husband, Matt Keller, for the podcast, and they are both phenomenal leaders, and this interview is incredible. There's so much insight in it. I'm excited for you to listen to it, but before we jump into the interview with Sarah, just a few announcements. If you're new to this podcast, just know that we are doing everything we can to help you grow and develop as a leader, and we're committed to bringing you 3 or 4 episodes every single month to help you develop. One episode will always be from a leadership event that we host in our city. One will be an interview I have with a high-level leader, and then once a month you'll get a leadership lesson by me. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, we'd really appreciate if you would leave a rating and review on iTunes. It really does make a difference. Thanks in advance for that. And I want to thank our sponsors, Henny Jewelers. They are a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny, and my wife, Laura, and I actually got our engagement rings and wedding rings at Henny Jewelers, and we're absolutely thrilled with our experience. Not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, John gave Laura and I a book to help us prepare for our marriage, and he's been investing in me as a leader, a father, and a husband now for many years, and I just appreciate him so much. But if you're looking for jewelry and are in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And I want to thank our other sponsor, Alex Tulandon Real Estate Resources. Alex is a full-time realtor with Keller Williams Realty, whose team is committed to providing clients with highly effective premier real estate experiences throughout the greater Pittsburgh region. Alex is a member and supporter of L3 Leadership, and he would love the opportunity to connect with you. You can learn more about Alex and his work at pittsburghpropertyshowcase.com. Everyone, let's jump right into our interview with Sarah. You're in for such a treat. Sarah Keller is the executive director of a church that her and her husband planted called Next Level Church in Fort Myers, Florida. I've had the privilege of following their leadership for the past 5 or 6 years, and what I love about Sarah and Matt is they are extremely intentional about caring for people, and they care way more about who people are than what they do. And they're very intentional about creating a culture where people can grow and deal with the baggage and issues in their life. And you're going to get to hear Sarah talk about that and talk about how they intentionally develop a culture of care and candor at Next Level. So much good information in that. You're going to get to hear Sarah give advice to women in leadership. You're going to hear her talk about overcoming insecurity and so much more. There's so much in this interview. Get ready to take some serious notes. That being said, let's jump right into the interview, and I'll be back at the end with a few announcements. All right. Hey, Sarah, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. And my first question is, you're the executive director at Next Level Church. You lead the executive team, one of the fastest growing churches in America. You guys are doing incredible things that are impacting leaders all over the nation. And so everyone sees that. But I'm curious, what about your leadership journey is there that you wish people knew before you got to this point? What do you wish they knew about that journey?
That it's a lot harder than it looks. I think in starting Next Level Church 15 years ago, I remember driving. We have this bridge in Southwest Florida. It's the Cape Coral Bridge. So it takes you from Fort Myers to Cape Coral, and it's this beautiful view. When we first moved from Indiana to Florida, I remember being on this bridge and so many times looking out on the water that was just gorgeous and saying, I love Florida. Like, I just love living here after looking at cornfields for a long time, Yeah. And one night, I think it was either the night before or 2 nights before we started Next Level Church, we were driving over the bridge, and Matt said to me, he's like, when you close your eyes and you picture Next Level Church, what do you see? And I just remember kind of doing that. We're crossing over this big bridge, and I'm looking out, and then I closed my eyes, and then I looked up and I said, I see 2,000 people just worshiping and just having a great time. That's just what I see. And he's like, yeah, me too. And I said, how many people do you think are going to show up? We're getting ready to have church in a movie theater for the first time, and we had 85 seats. And I said, how many people do you think is going to show up? And he's like, I don't know, and it just, I think the hardest part about, having a dream and having a vision of what you want is being able to see it, but having no idea what it's going to take to get there, And I think looking back on that moment, 15 years ago, if I could have told myself at that moment, like, just so you know, it's going to be about 10 years before you see that come to pass. And there's going to be a lot of hard days and a lot of hard years in between. I probably would have been like, I'm good. Turn around the car. Let's go home. And yet just God's faithfulness every step of the way, through that. It's been a lot harder, but it's always been worth it. So I think I wish people would know that, because I think, and I probably did this too, you look on at people who are, quote, successful, or, who have arrived to whatever destination you think, oh, I see that. And man, I wish we could be there. Or I think we could be that. And you're like, yeah, but it's gonna cost a lot more to actually get there. I don't think I was prepared for that. At that time, but it's been a lot more about the journey every step of the way, a lot less about the destination.
Yeah. So can you talk about what was hard about it? You talked about the price you had to pay, and I think John Maxwell said, everyone idolizes and wants the perks of leadership, but no one realizes the sacrifices involved. I know you guys talk a lot about the S-curve and making the jump. What are some of those things that you had to do that were extremely hard to even get to where you are today?
I think probably some extremely hard things were failing a lot, and not seeing failure as final, or not seeing failure as, well, then it's time to just shut this thing down. Dave Ramsey, I heard Dave Ramsey say, when you look at successful people, you look at them and they're standing on a mountain and you think, I want that. But then he said, you don't realize what they're standing on is a pile of failures. And they're just failures that you just kept getting up from. And when I heard him say that, I've never heard someone put words to how I feel about our journey. That is how I feel. There's been so many failures. We did a lot of things wrong. We were so naive. We started our church with $9,200 and really not a clue of what in the world we were doing. Matt and I and two college guys, one of them who still smoked, and here we are starting a church. Like, what are we thinking? What are we doing? And so we did a lot of things wrong, But I think looking at every time we did something wrong and not saying, well, then surely we can't do this, but going, all right, we did that wrong, we failed, and not giving up, and just really looking at the failures and learning from it. That's painful, It's a lot easier to get it right and to be like, woohoo, we did it, that was awesome. And I would just say that there were just a lot of failures along the way, but just this determination to not give up. There's just a lot of hard things, people letting us down, thinking someone was going to take the whole journey with you, and then realizing they couldn't, and they're not supposed to, and just, fighting rejection, and, just a lot of that, I think, has just been that pile of pain in the journey, but really just looking on and just not giving up through it all, I guess.
I think that's crazy. I'm just curious. So I was going to ask this later, but how do you deal with the painful parts of leadership like that? How do you guys actually process that and not just throw up your hands and just say, I'm done. I can't take this anymore. I mean, does it ever get easier, or is it just something you have to continually process?
That's a great question, Doug. I think the pain isn't easier, but learning to deal with the pain is easier. So I expect it now. I don't think I expected it when I first started in leadership. I think I expected to maybe go through a couple of painful things and then you get past it. And I think I've come to learn that that's just not the life we're living. We're living a life that is actually full of pain and full of trouble and full of heartache. But it's so worth it to work through it. So on a practical side, I've gotten much better at learning to deal with the pain. I didn't know how to deal with it early on. I think I grew up in a home where it was never said, but it was definitely learned to just stuff your feelings and suck it up and move on. And things like, you got this, or fake it till you make it. And those things I brought in with me into my leadership journey, and it did not work. And so learning to actually face that pain, face when someone hurts me or offends me, or when I feel let down, to actually deal with it. So on a practical side, I've learned a lot about that. I mean, one thing is definitely that I have to process that pain. If there's an offense that comes in, because that's just what's going to happen. Like, people don't mean to offend. Sometimes they do. Most of the time they don't. They've got their junk, I've got mine. We encounter each other, things happen, and offense comes. And, for a long time, I didn't really know how to process that. But I think I've learned a lot about offense. And so I think one of the major ways, that I've learned to deal with that is just looking at offense in a couple different ways. One of them is minor offenses, and the other is major. And so the minor stuff, I just learned to let that stuff roll off my shoulders and not hold on to it, and not, they said this in the meeting, or they looked this certain way at me and now I'm offended by it, or I think maybe something's wrong. Like, it's good. We're probably good. I know their heart, and I'm just going to let some of that minor stuff go. But sometimes it's minor, or sometimes I think it's minor, but then it doesn't go away. And then I realize, I actually think this is more major. And so really kind of learning to look at offense in a couple different ways, minor offense and then major offense. And if it's major, then it has to be dealt with. I have to sit down. I have to have a harder conversation with that person. I have to say, hey, when you said that to me, it hurt me, or, and I don't know if you meant it or not, but this is how I heard it. And being able to actually reconcile that offense so I can move on through that pain. Sometimes it's really not with a person. Sometimes it's not with someone you can even really sit down and talk with. So then I've had to learn how to process through that on my own, just journaling and, and really spending a lot of time just meditating. And for me, in my walk with Christ and in my faith journey, it's been a lot of taking it to God and asking Him to heal those parts in me that are hurting, so I can move on. Because I think I've just learned in leadership that when I walk around with that pain, or I walk around with that offense, then I'm going to lead out of that. And that's nothing good that I want to pass on to people. And so I think just learning to process that pain and just to really expect it, it's like I think again, early on in my journey, it's like you look on, you think when they arrive at that place, then they've got it all together. And there's some pinnacle of leadership that when you get there, then it's all taken care of. And that's just not true. I think I've just learned along the way, oh no, there's going to be different challenges, different kinds of heartaches, when we first started the church, we didn't have any money. Like, there was nothing. We drank Kool-Aid for a year. My husband, I remember saying, hey, when it comes to the budget, there's no money for Coca-Cola. Like, that was a big, and so, that's painful. Like, that's a hard, we had to sacrifice a lot of things. And so, no, now there is provision. We don't have that kind of struggle. We just have a whole different struggle now. So yeah, I think that's what I say a little bit about pain. I don't know if that helps.
No, that's so good. And it leads into my next question. So I've observed this, and Ben, my friend, as I was researching, he probably said it best. He said you exemplify the statement, we care more about who you are than what you do. And I know from watching you guys lead in your church, your culture is extremely important, and the health of the leaders in your culture is extremely important to you. So I just want to talk to you a few questions about culture. First, can you just talk about the culture you and Matt have tried to create at Next Level Church, and how you do that and why?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm honored that Ben would even say that about me. That's actually very humbling. Because that is my heart. And so, for someone who's in an organization that actually encounters me to tell you that I'm living that out, that means a lot. So thank you. I don't take that for granted. I think some people grow up in grow up in leadership cultures or happen onto leadership cultures that are healthy and good and vibrant. And they look on at those cultures and they're like, that's what we want to create, you know. To be honest, Matt and I just didn't have that. I grew up in, you know, in a ministry setting. I was a pastor's kid, and grew up in not just in our church, but then even just a greater organizational setting where wonderful people. But there was, when it came to leadership, it was the opposite. It was definitely, we care a lot more about what you can do for us and for our ministry and for our platform, whether it was ever said. Those were just kind of the things that were implied through the way they led. And so being the recipients of that for quite a few years left Matt and I empty as leaders, you know, left us feeling like, is this really all about you? Is this, or do you even care about me? Do you see me? Do you know what God's put in me? And do you even care? And so in beginning Next Level Church, we walked in with a lot of that pain and had to process through that. But we had just this feeling of, I think it can be different. Like, I think we can lead others in a way where they know we actually care about them. We care about the gifts that are in them. We care about the talents that they have. We care about their family. We care about their life. And yeah, we're doing this thing together, you know, called leadership, and for us, you know, creating a church. But I really, really genuinely care about you. And so for us, that's why, you know, people are like, man, where did this come from? It's not because we read a book. It's not because we were taught it. It's because we actually were taught the opposite and felt that sting and that pain, and have just had this determination from early on. We want to create something different, something where people understand. So even, you know, it's just little small things early on, you know, saying to one of the guys who, you know, started the church with us, like, hey, we're here, we're going to pour into you for no matter how long God has you here. If it's, you know, 5 months, if it's 5 years, if it's 10 years, because we don't know what God has in store for you. Like, we believe in you so much. And there was this one moment, I remember it was like, probably 4 years in or something. And he was like, you know, you can stop asking me what's next. Like, I'm here. I love it here. And for us, it was that feeling of, I know, but we never want to hold on so tightly that you feel like it's all about what we're creating. We actually want you to know that deep down. And so, you know, I think it's important for people maybe to even just understand where that comes from, you know, because you can look on, you can read books and you can learn from others. That's great. We just learned the wrong way and just had this determination. The hardest part was that we didn't know how to do it at first. We had this, it has to be able to be different. We just didn't know how. So one of the first things that we did early on in our leadership journey was we just said, we are going to learn from everyone. We're going to be a sponge. We are going to soak it all in, you know, reading books. And, you know, Matt was just brilliant at this early on. He was much more of a reader than I was. I always said, it's like, I call him, you know, people call him Cliff Notes. I call him Matt Notes. He would read a book and then he would just download all of the good stuff to me. And I'm like, this is amazing. He was a much faster reader. And so, but we just devoured leadership, you know, John Maxwell books and Andy Stanley. And when we couldn't afford it, we drove to it. We sold multiple things to be able to drive to a conference in Atlanta called Catalyst. And there's about 2,000 people in a room. And we were just so desperate to learn how to do it. And so I think that's, you know, one of the things is just desperation to want a culture that is like that is rich, that really cares about people. That's kind of the why that really drove us initially.
Yeah, and so what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? You know, if I'm a leader and I come on board an organization, my life could be an emotional wreck. How, you know, maybe I came from a background that you guys came from where I've never seen a healthy culture modeled. What do you guys do if I were to come in and make me healthy?
Well, I think when we were smaller, it was easier. And I say smaller, meaning a staff of 10 or less. It was actually a lot easier not easier on a daily basis because you just have to keep having hard conversations, but easier for Matt and I as leaders because we could touch, feel, and personally invest in all of our staff. And know that personal investment in that staff was going to then pour onto everyone else. So, so if we're investing in 10 of our staff and, pouring that in, then they're going to turn around and pour it into the teams they lead. So it was a lot easier. In the earlier sense, it looked like staff meetings, weekly staff meetings where we were very intentional about teaching something, sharing something. So never just working on the tactical side, but always working on the team side. How are we doing, team? How is this going? Really evaluating things when we encountered things that weren't good. So we're in this team meeting and this guy just has this horrible attitude. He's just sitting back and going, or disengaged or negative or playing devil's advocate. And all of a sudden we're like looking on going, oh, that is not the culture we want. That's not what we're trying to create. And pulling him aside, hey, what's going on? What was your attitude in that meeting? Tell me what's going on in your life. Like, hey, you can't be like that. This is why, like, you influence others and really dealing with that culture piece on a constant basis. It was it was hard on a daily basis, but overall easier for Matt and I because we could touch, sense, feel all of it. It has gotten much more complicated as we've gotten past that. We're close to 50 staff now, and we got it wrong for a long time. I think, Matt and I thought, our heart will just kind of transfer down and it'll just kind of keep happening. And that is not true at all. And so the biggest thing that I think we've learned is we have to have the systems in place that reflect that same heart. You can have this heart of, we care more about you than what you do, but you have to figure out the systems that actually sustain that heart. Because if you don't, then it's just going to get lost because not everyone has experienced what Matt and I have experienced. Not everyone has that same heart and that same DNA. And so probably one of the key things that we had to do when our staff got bigger is put our leadership behavioral values in place and really look out, because for a long time, I don't know that we knew how to say what it was that we were teaching people. We just were. Like, it was just us. It was in us. It's just what we shared. But we didn't necessarily have anything written on a wall. We couldn't necessarily point to it. We could say a lot of things, like, hey, we want you to be vulnerable and authentic. So we could say those things, but we didn't have them written anywhere. It wasn't evaluated. So that's actually what we've grown a lot into now that our staff has gotten bigger, is really figured out the systems for that heart to go forward. So we put our leadership behavioral values in place. We have 7 of those, like trust, we dare to be vulnerable, sacrifice, we have an attitude that says we get to do this, fun. There's just, we have a lot of different leadership behavioral values that we value. And what we had to do was sit down and say, what are all the things we value? How do we behave and how do we want people to act here? And when we see them acting or behaving in a way that isn't our heart, that isn't our DNA, then we have to call them out on it. We have to say, hey, I feel like you're not being vulnerable with me right now. I feel like you're bottling stuff up. What's going on? Do you trust me? Do you trust me as a leader with what's going on in your life? And because, hey, around here we trust, and that is one of our behavioral values, and like, it's big. So we teach it. We teach it on a monthly basis. Right now in our staff chapel, we teach one of those values. We'll sometimes do a whole teaching on it in our weekly staff meeting so that it can just keep getting into the culture. We also evaluate it. So that's actually what people are evaluated on in our reviews. So it doesn't have to feel like, well, I just feel, and I think you should. And people are like, what does that mean? Like, no, around here, we sacrifice, or we trust, or we're teachable. And so, teachability is one of our behavioral values. And if someone doesn't have that teachable spirit, if they are acting like they know everything, we can call them out on it. Hey, around here, we're teachable. So I feel like you're not being very teachable right now. I'm trying to share something with you and you're closed off. And so in our reviews, we can actually address that, and people understand in that sense that we really do care more about you. Yeah, in our reviews, we're going to look at the job, but that stuff should be getting done. We're going to talk about that. Like, if you're not getting the job done, you're probably not going to be around here much, but we have to really look at how you are and how we are together, because I know it's like the secret sauce. Patrick Lencioni, he talks about there's a smart side and there's a healthy side. And a lot of people like to focus on the smart side. It's easy. The smart side is actually a lot easier to deal with. What we're doing, how we're doing it, what we're creating. You need smart people to figure that stuff out. You need them to be talented. But the healthy side, it's the secret sauce. It's the sauce that makes people want to stay here. It's the sauce that makes the team actually worth working on. And so I think for us, those are just kind of a few things that we do.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm curious. So cander's certainly a part. You said you have no. Well, maybe you have. My first question is candor hard for you guys, as caring as you are? And then two, how long do you stick with someone? So you said, hey, if they're not executing, they won't last long. The guy with the bad attitude. Can you just talk to leaders? How long do you stick with someone before you have to let go? I know you guys believe in people. Have you learned about that and being candid?
That is a great question. Candor was not easy for me to begin with. Even harder for Matt. So Matt is on Myers-Briggs. He's a strong feeler. And I'm actually a really strong thinker. So Matt processes problems and things that come up, decision-making through how he feels and how others feel. I process through it logically. But both of us, coming from those different veins, had different reasons why candor was hard. For Matt, candor was hard because he was such a feeler that he was like, so I'm thinking and I'm feeling and I don't know, but maybe it's me. And then he's like, he would walk away and think, did I really tell them what I thought the problem was, or did we just leave hugging each other? For me, it was actually hard because I was so logical that I would maybe approach things from such a logical standpoint that I've actually had to learn that there is candor and there's the logic of, hey, you had a really bad attitude in that meeting, but I can't just be like, hey, you had a bad attitude. What's going on? Okay, that's like the logical side of approaching with candor. I've had to learn to actually soften and know that there's probably something going on that's a little deeper, that's a little bit more. And so I still have to be candid with you. I have to say, hey, you had a bad attitude in that meeting. Did you notice that? Hear what they say, listen, and then know that there might be something deeper that's actually going on in their life. And so for me, I think the candor has come because I actually do care about that person more than just what they're doing. If it's just about what they do, then if they have a bad attitude, but they're knocking it out of the park, then I'm not going to deal with an attitude because they're knocking it out of the park. But if they're knocking it out of the park and they have bad attitude, then I know there's probably something going on in their heart and I need to help them with that. And I care more about them. And so I'm going to sit down and say, hey, you had a bad attitude. Not only is it affecting the team, but that has to be affecting you. What's going on? Something going on at home, something going on in your heart. And I actually have to care about them to actually approach that with candor. So I've had to learn. I still hate hard conversations, hate them with a passion. I still get sick to my stomach. Oh man, I know I've got to talk to them about this. I see this. I'm seeing this massive insecurity coming out in their leadership. I watched them lead that meeting and it was just not good. I know I need to talk to them about this, but I'm like, this is going to be so hard. I want to throw up. I hate it. But I've seen the outcomes. I've seen them cross lines, grow in their leadership, and I know it is my job to grow them. And so because I've seen the results, it makes the candor easier. If the result always came that it ended in a fight, and it was horrible, and things got worse, well then no, I wouldn't want to enter in those conversations, but I've actually seen it go well. So our goal is that when we see that there's a gap, we kind of talk about the gap principle. So, so the organization is growing, and as the leaders of the organization, Matt and I, it's our job to keep growing too. But as we're growing, if the organization, do it this way, if the organization is growing at this rate, but a leader is not growing at the same rate, if a leader is not keeping up pace and there's a gap there, when it's back here, it's small. The gap's really, really small. And you're like, oh, that's just a little thing. It's no big deal. They kind of have a bad attitude, or sometimes they deal with some insecurity and it's not a big deal. Probably true, not a big deal when the organization's smaller or there's less at stake. But as the organization grows, or as they get put into a new place of leadership and they're being required to grow, that gap, if they're not growing, that gap's going to widen. So instead of the gap back here being really small, now this gap, they're staying flatlined, sometimes even going down. This gap's gotten really, really wide. So our goal in having hard conversations and bringing light to these things is that they can just close that gap. And that's what happens most of the time. You have a small conversation, you pull them aside after a meeting and say, hey, just real quick, wanted to kind of, show you this. And they go, oh, thank you so much. Yes, I'm going to close that gap. Next meeting, you don't see it, we're good. They've moved on. But sometimes they don't close that gap. Sometimes that gap just keeps getting wider and wider. And that requires a harder conversation. That's not just a here and there conversation. That's what we would call kind of like the ultimate hard conversation, where we have to sit down with someone and actually say, hey, this isn't working.
Yeah.
Here are, and be very, very clear about the probably like 5 areas where it's not working. I continue to watch this attitude that's not teachable. Insecurities coming out. You've got a lot of pride there. And here's how I'm seeing it affect those that you're leading. Here's how I'm seeing it affect you. And we've talked about this. We've had a lot of conversations about it and around it. But now this gap has gotten so big that if you don't close it, then you're not going to be able to stay here. And then we'll make it very, very clear in that moment what it is that we need to see in order for them to stay. And we've seen it go both ways. Sometimes those leaders can close that gap. Sometimes they can close the gap enough, but even through that, we actually find that maybe the seat they're in is just wrong. Maybe they've been over promoted in a seat, or maybe it's just not their sweet spot. And so sometimes kind of through that, we'll kind of go, maybe there's another seat on the bus. Maybe it's not this seat. Maybe this seat is wrong. So we'll try and do as much as we can to actually keep them on the bus. If they can close that gap in their character and those things and start to close that up and shore it up. Sometimes it's like, hey, that's all getting better, but there's still just this frustration in the job. I think that's a competency thing. I think maybe this just isn't the right seat for you. So now we have a big enough organization. When we were smaller, it was kind of, they didn't close the gap. It was like, there's not really a lot of other places to be or to go, right? Now we've kind of got a lot of different areas that it's like, hey, maybe you just need a different seat. And then sometimes it does end in letting them go. Sometimes it does end in, at the end of the day, this just isn't working. And lovingly walking them out the door. It's just, especially in the church, it's just different. It's just different than any other company or organization because in a company, you're just like, you can walk them out the door and never see them again. In our church, most of these people, they're in our church, they're still a part of our church. They're a part of our church family. And so we lovingly walk them out the door of our organization, but we say, you're still in this family. You're still a part of the family. You can't be on the team right now, but you're still in the family.
That's so good. I'm sure there's a billion gaps we could talk about, but you mentioned insecurity twice. And it was funny, I was actually in a meeting with a bunch of leaders here. We were talking about a principle that Larry Betancourt learned from you guys. where you encourage people to fall in love with the bus, not their seat on the bus. And I think that's like the greatest thing ever. But can you talk about the gap of insecurity and how you help leaders overcome that? And just out of curiosity, do you and Matt struggle with that, or have you? And how did you overcome that gap yourselves?
Yeah, I think probably one of the only ways that we can help people overcome it is because we've had it. Both of us in different ways. I think for me, I dealt with a lot of insecurity. Honestly, not necessarily in my competency and what I was being asked to do in some areas, but then I would find it in other areas. So, meaning this, I knew that I could lead a meeting, run a project, get a team together, get that project going, and accomplish it. But when I was asked to speak, oh, no, I don't speak. Well, what was that really? That was just a deep-seated insecurity. That was just a fear of that. But no, I don't speak. Like, that's not what I do. So, for me, insecurity has definitely reared its ugly head in a lot of different ways. Being a woman in leadership, leading other men, I've had to face insecurity. Face insecurity of speaking, for sure. That was definite insecurity that I had to face, and and really even just an insecurity in being a leader in general. I don't know that early on I ever just saw myself as a leader. I just thought I was a gifted doer. And so seeing myself as a leader and actually having to kind of fight through that insecurity was a big deal. So it is something that both Matt and I have struggled, dealt with, overcome, and, can rear its ugly head every now and then. And you have to keep overcoming it. But, I think we see it, I think a lot of times in our organization, we see insecurity and pride kind of go hand in hand. A lot of times people will deal with insecurity, and we'll either see insecurity result with this idea of, I'm not good enough, I can't, I would never, and they're not actually able to rise up because of that insecurity. And so in that, we have to deal with that. Like, hey, you have a lack of confidence, and being able to just speak into them, see what maybe they can't see, and pull them up into that secure and confident place. That one is probably the easier one to deal with. Honestly, if someone has that insecurity, I can, hey, listen, you got this. I believe in you. I've seen this in you. They'll rise up to the occasion and go for it. And once they have a couple of wins under their belt, a lot of that insecurity will just go away. The harder thing that I've seen to deal with is when someone's dealing with pride that's actually rooted in insecurity. So the only way that really we've been able to identify this is because this is exactly who I was. So in my leadership journey, I had a lot of insecurity about being a woman. I had a lot of insecurity about for me, just the uniqueness of being a pastor's wife, but then also being a leader. There was a lot of insecurity, and other people kind of put it on me sometimes too, like, oh, you're just in this seat because you're Matt's wife, or, you're just, I guess I have to listen to you because you're the pastor's wife, or things like that. So it would wear on me, and it would make me feel insecure. Like, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't have the skill. Maybe I shouldn't. And so that would lead to insecurity. I actually listened to those voices or believed it, I had insecurity that was in me from things in just growing up in a ministry situation where there weren't a lot of empowered women. And so women who spoke, or women who could lead in their own authority. So I carried a lot of that insecurity in. I just didn't know it was there. I mean, it would just rear its ugly head in a lot of different ways. Like Matt would say, hey, you should speak on this, or you should lead this. And I would just be like, no, I really don't, Well, I didn't realize that was like a deeper insecurity in me. But the harder one is pride. And what happens over time is if you have that insecurity and you don't deal with it, but instead you kind of just let it go. There's that gap of insecurity. And what can happen is you actually learn to function and be successful, and you don't deal with insecurity, and you go, oh, I guess I am good at this. Like, oh, look at me. Look at what I just did. I just went and, led this whole thing. So this is exactly what happened to me in 2011. I probably had a lot of insecurity in me. I just didn't really know it was there. And so I was functioning out of a place of insecurity, but I had a lot of gifts and talents and abilities. And so in 2010, we were getting ready to go from the high school, a portable location. We had been portable with our church for 9 years. And so we're getting ready for, it's kind of like this massive monumental moment in our organization, in our church life. And the massive monumental moment was going from being portable to being permanent. And so Matt said, babe, if we're going to get out of this project what we know we want it to be, then I want you to head it up. And what the project was taking over a facility that needed renovated, remodeled, added to. I've never done a construction project. I've never done anything like this, but he could see in me, I had the vision. I knew what this end product looked like. I knew what it would feel like. I knew how to think through people flow and movement, and work with our GC on that, work with our designer, and figure out the finances. I had that gift and talent and ability to do all of that. And he was like, "You got this." And I'm like, "Are you sure? I don't know, and I've never dealt with, and I have to lead a bunch of men." And he's like, "You got this." So I'm like, great. He didn't know I had deep-seated insecurity at that time, right? So I'm like, awesome. All right, I've got this. And I will never forget, we had this goal, like crazy audacious goal, like could we be in by Easter, which actually meant that the project would only take about 17 weeks. And I'll never forget the general contractor, he looked up, Matt said, is that possible? And the general contractor looked up knowing I was heading up basically every ultimate decision that had to be made. And that GC looked up and he said, it's possible if she doesn't slow us down. And in that moment, I was like, game on. Like, I will not slow us down. I will function. I will, I got this. And I ran myself ragged, worked 90 hours a week. Like, we got the whole thing done. And, we moved in and our church doubled in 9 months. The whole thing was like, it's the what you always wanted. But that deep-seated insecurity that was in me was never dealt with. And what happened in that period of time was it was our ultimate rival. It was the thing where I looked on and went, look what I just did. Like, I actually did that. And what happened was that place where I had been insecure actually got filled with pride. And I needed to be humbled. And so in that moment of my leadership journey, it was the ugliest version of Sarah that you could ever have. I was filled with pride. I had a lot of things in my heart that were kind of like, that were just really ugly, that were things like, look what I did. And I actually thought I did it, when someone else would get accolades about something, I would have, of course, I never said it out loud. I would have these ugly things that would go on inside, like, hey, do they not know that I'm the one who taught that? Like, do they? And it was bad. It was bad. And I think, I had that deep-seated insecurity that when I was successful, I'll just got filled with pride and had to be dug out. So it's one of the harder things that when we see it in our team, it's harder to deal with because there's the pride and there's the, somebody being prideful about something or wanting accolades or wanting affirmation. But then there's the deeper thing that might be going on, which is actually insecurity. And so it's hard to deal with. It was hard to deal with in myself, but we have to just lovingly walk people through that. And the only way we can walk them through is because we've been through it ourselves.
That's so good. Where do I want to go from there? There's so much good stuff. I would just say along the lines of character, you may have already answered this, so if you did, we can move on to the next question. But you guys lead with the focus of character over competence. I just wrote two questions. How do you look for cracks in people's character? And then how do you deal with those cracks? And how do you help people develop their character, not just their competence?
I think it's probably just the cracks in the character. The way we do it is we try and teach. We do this ourselves, and then we try and teach our supervisors and others to just look for the deeper thing that's probably going on. So it's you're going to notice the little stuff, and the little stuff, it's little, right? And you think, oh, that's not a big deal. That's just little. But there's probably something deeper going on that's more of a character thing. And so, again, it's we've got team offices. So if there's someone on your team who, within the period of a week, 3 different times says out loud, "Oh, I just, so overwhelmed." Or, they're like, "Oh, I got this email from so-and-so, and they're supposed to whatever," and they're just complaining out loud, right? Well, okay. Some of that, not a big deal. Every once in a while, we're going to have just that minor stuff that's like, yeah, I had a bad day, or I just, vented out loud. Okay. But you see that start to add up. You see that was 3 times this week. That was out loud. They actually said someone else's name. Don't just blow that over. Understand, that's a little crack. Hey, what's going on? What's actually going on? Around here we have an attitude that says we get to do this. It kind of feels like you have an attitude that's saying, I have to. What's going on there? And just really, again, most of the time it doesn't show up in the big stuff. Most of the time it shows up in the little stuff. And so you're like, I love your question because it's a crack. That's all it is, just a little crack. But if we let those little cracks go, then they're going to create these deeper gashes. And all of a sudden you're going to have a massive problem over here. If you would have just shorted up along the way and dealt with it.
That's awesome. You talked a lot about being a woman in leadership. So the question that came to my mind when you're talking about that is if you guys decided, which I think would be sweet, to do an advance one day with all women leaders. And you're the keynote, right? So you're in a room full of women, potential leaders. What do you say to them?
I think one of the biggest things that I've learned about being a woman in leadership is that I have to not think about the fact that I'm a woman.
Yeah.
And it might sound funny, but that was kind of like the big aha moment for me about 4 years ago. It was just this feeling of, why am I letting that hold me back? What is it? And I just kind of had to go back and, dig out just some things that had been spoken over me or things that I had heard or, that are like, those aren't even true. This isn't even, women can lead just as well as men can. We lead differently. Sometimes we lead better. Sometimes we lead worse. Sometimes, but it doesn't matter. So I would think, probably one of the first things that I would say is there's a room full of women, and I don't want us to focus on the fact that we are all women here today. We are all incredible leaders that are gifted and talented, and I want us to rise up and be that confidently. So I think just kind of speaking that into women would probably be one of the first things I would say. Just don't think about the fact that you're a woman.
I love that. Love. Okay, so it's been 45 minutes. I just want to jump into some fun questions, kind of just rush through them, and then we'll wrap up. Fun question. If you could go back to your 20-year-old self and have coffee with her, what would you tell her?
Oh, my 20-year-old self. I would probably sit down and say, okay, sweetie, I need to tell you something really hard. Are you ready? And she'd be like, probably not. I have no idea what you're going to say. And then I would say, you're more messed up than you think you are. I had just carried a lot of things in from childhood, teenage years, and I think we all do. I tell my kids today, hey guys, just so you know, I'm probably screwing you up. I'm going to go ahead and set aside a savings account for counseling that you're going to need later for how I'm screwing you up, because I'm an imperfect mom and I'm raising you, and I'm sure there are things that you're going to need to deal with coming out of your childhood, right? Being 20, young in ministry, young young in leadership, I would have just looked back at myself and said, you're more messed up than you think you are, and that's okay. And I probably would have told myself to get a good counselor and dig some of that stuff out so that I could become the leader that I was called to become a little faster than I did.
That's great. I'll share a link of it, but I watched your talk that you gave at the NLC event called Serving His Dreams. It was phenomenal. And you talked about that season where you were working 90-hour weeks and kind of the outcome that had on you. You shared 7 lessons. Can you just share one lesson you learned from that season? Maybe even give some context for how you had to learn. I know that was some difficult lessons you had to learn.
Yeah, a lot of difficult lessons. Probably the biggest lesson I learned out of that entire season of time, where I ended up spending 11 days in a hospital, flat on my back, and coming out of it, and going to counseling. One of the things my counselor said was, "Look at what God had to do." Now, I don't believe that God causes things. So this is going to sound like that, but I actually don't believe that. I believe that God allows things and he works it together for your good. And so I can see that in my story now. But she said, look at what God had to do to get your attention. He almost had to kill you. And, and I can laugh about it now, but at the time I was like, you're right. I almost died because I wouldn't listen to myself or my body or how I actually felt. And I think that the biggest lesson I learned was that it's okay to be weak. And my weakness is what actually makes me strong. My vulnerability, my ability to not be okay, my weakness is what actually gives me strength. And people can learn from us if we're smart. They can learn from us if we're talented, but they can connect with us through our weakness. And I had to learn that it was okay to be weak, and it was okay to be vulnerable, and it was okay to let people into just how messed up I was, and it was okay to be messed up because that's actually what would connect me to others as a leader, as a mom, as a wife, and weakness. I learned how to be weak.
That's great. Back to more fun questions. Sorry, I forgot to include that one earlier. What books do you find yourself giving away most often? If you give away, or if not, what are the top 3 books you recommend?
I love giving away books. Top 3 books. Probably when I'm encountering different categories. When I encounter, especially a woman in leadership who is trying to do the quote life balance thing. I think a lot of times women deal with that for whatever reason a little bit more than men. How do I find balance? I need balance. I like to laugh and say there's no such thing as balance. There's just different opportunities and different seasons at different times. And so I love the book by Christine Kane that says, can I have it all and do it all, please? And the whole concept from this book is, you can have it all and do it all. You just can't have it all and do it all at the same time. And so I think, a lot of times in our leadership culture today, we want everything now, fast, immediate. And so just the idea of it being a journey, I love that book. I love anything Lisa TerKeurst has written. There's multiple books, and it's not necessarily, they're not necessarily leadership books, but they're personal books that when you read them, you will become a better leader. I love her Unglued book, was probably a deal changer for me. When I encounter someone who is kind of locked up inside, which is how I was, like, oh, I don't know how to deal with this. Like I can lead and I can do, but man, I lead out of myself. I lead out of stress. I lead out of frustration. I give that, and I put that on everyone. Her book helped me a ton with that. It's called Unglued. It's all about how to remain calm in even stressful situations. And so that's a big one for me. Probably a book that no matter what, I always try and give men and women is Shaunti Feldhahn. This is a little bit more on the marriage side of things. Shaunti Feldhahn wrote 2 books called For Women Only and For Men Only. They were deal changer books for me in understanding as a wife, but it's totally translated into leadership. The book For Women Only is all about getting into the inside of a man and how he thinks. And then For Men Only is getting inside of a woman and how she thinks and reacts. And they're amazing books that really help you, because again, men and women, totally different, and really understanding. We always think everyone else is like us. So understanding how others are totally different and how to respect that, and how to, I think for me as a woman, like just knowing that a man has deep-seated insecurity, but most of the time they don't want to let you in on that. Like that's been so important in my leadership to really understand that. As a wife, I've had to understand it too, but For Men Only, For Women Only, those are just a few of them.
Yeah. And the same question with podcasts. I'm assuming Matt's podcast is at the top of the list.
For sure.
Yeah.
I have so many podcasts that I listen to. I am an Audible learner. I had to learn that about myself. I joked earlier about not being a reader. I had to kind of get over the fact that I try and read about 10 paper books a year because it's just good discipline for me. But I am actually a really slow reader. I have a very hard time actually conceptualizing when I'm reading. I'm a much more Audible learner. So I have Audible and then I have podcasts, and I listen in the car and listen while I get ready. And that's actually how I learn a lot. And so podcasts, Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast is a must. For me, Craig Rochelle Leadership Podcast, Leadership Momentum, which is Chris Brown. I really enjoy his podcast. That's from the Dave Ramsey. Also, Entree Leadership. Love listening to that podcast. So those are, trying to think if there's anything else. I'm probably later going to think, oh, why didn't I say that? But yeah, those are probably a few. I've actually dabbled in, I love Henry Cloud, and I've dabbled in his new leadership podcast. It's got some cool, just some cool concepts from Henry too. So those are just a few. Yeah.
Best advice on working side by side with your husband for all these years and staying married and keeping your family.
Best advice is remember that the goal is to stay married and keep your family. I mean, really, I can laugh, but it's true. I think that is probably one of the things that I'm most proud of, in a humbling way, that God has brought me to this place where it's true. In knowing that we made a great team and we were supposed to work together, we also knew it was going to bring a lot of challenges. And so probably best advice has been to talk, never stop talking, communicate, like we communicate like crazy. And so, when a season changes, when something doesn't feel right, something isn't going right, talk about it. Just stop. Don't ever stop talking and communicating. I think it's probably the biggest piece of advice for us now. I think the thing I'm most proud of now is being married 20 years, still, working together, having 2 boys that for us love the church and love being with us and love being with the family. I think just even keeping that at the forefront of our mind. We could work hard, we could create a church, we could do all of this and totally lose our family, and then it would be worth nothing. And so really keeping that at the forefront of our mind is that our marriage is first, our kids and the church and the work we do is not first. So.
Yeah, that's so good. I'll just leave this open to you, but if someone's listening to this and they're saying, wow, this sounds awesome, I want to connect with Sarah or what they're doing at the church or leadership or learn more, where can people find you? And then what can we pray for you guys for, and how can we serve what you're doing?
Oh, thank you. My email is sarah@nextlevelchurch.com. So if I have an amazing assistant whose name is Diane, and we say of our executive assistants that they don't have their own job. We are two people doing one job, and so she can even help you with a lot about me or things that we do in our organization. If you're even just like, hey, where do I get those behavioral core values? Like, she can get those for you. But that's just one of the ways. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, and you can connect with me there as well. I speak occasionally in our church and, different venues like that. But we've got Advance One Day. We just did our Advance One Day. You mentioned that, for business leaders. I did a talk on delegation there, and I think you can purchase that on the advanceoneday.com website. So those are just a few of the ways.
Very cool. Last two questions.
Sorry, you asked how you can pray. You asked how you can pray.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I just remember that. I was like, oh, wait, don't pray. I'm going to take you up on that. For us. Here's what to pray for. There is way more vision right now that God has given us than there are leaders and resources. And so we are just praying and believing. Our whole goal in prayer from the very beginning of our church has just been God to be trustworthy. When you find us trustworthy with what you've given us, we believe you'll give us more. And so, we are doing our part to be found trustworthy with as much as we know how. And so we are believing that God is going to entrust us with more, and that means more leaders, more resources, so that the vision for Southwest Florida and impacting other leaders around the nation and the world can continue to go forth. So that's what you can pray for.
That's amazing. Thank you. And we will definitely be praying for you. And then at the end of your life, what do you ultimately, looking back, want to be remembered for?
I think that I would want to be remembered for the fact that I loved deeply. That I knew how to receive God's love, how to love myself enough to then turn around and love others deeply. If I can get to the end of my life and people will say that, and she loved, then I think that'll be success for me.
Great. Anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
No, I think, I'll say this, just keep it up. Probably doing better than you think you are. We're always harder on ourselves than probably we should be. So keep up the great work. Keep learning about yourself. Keep putting yourself out there. Try new things. Try things that are potential failures for you, because that's how you're going to learn. That's how you're going to grow. If there's anything that you could give up today and have someone else do for you, and you could teach and you could pour into them, do it. Stop doing it. Look on and say, what is it that I am doing today that if I could pour into someone else and have them do it, then they could go further and faster and just do it. Just keep leading.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Sarah. I really appreciate it. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to my interview with Sarah Keller. I really hope that you enjoyed it. You can find ways to connect with her in the show notes at l3leadership.org/episode 142. A few things before we finish. I do want to let you know that if you enjoyed Sarah's interview, you can also listen to our interview with her husband, Matt, in episode number 89 of the L3 Leadership Podcast. It's one of my favorites, so I encourage you to go check that out. And also, if you live in the Pittsburgh area, we're actually having Matt Keller come in and teach leadership for us at a live event on Wednesday, May 24th. So if you'd like to come and see Matt live, you can do that. Just go to our website for more info at l3leadership.org. I want to thank our other sponsor, Bat Inc., led by my friend Russell Livingston. He has a huge passion for developing next-generation leaders, which is why he hosts our monthly leadership breakfast. But he has a phenomenal company as well. They're an insurance broker, third-party administrator, and consulting firm, and do business all over the country and do some really unique things. So if you have any insurance needs, I encourage you to check them out at babbins.com. That's BABBINS.com. And lastly, if you want to stay in touch with us and everything we're doing here at L3 Leadership, you can sign up for our email list at l3leadership.org, and you'll get a free copy of my ebook, Making the Most of Mentoring, which is my step-by-step process for getting meetings with mentors. And as always, if you enjoyed the podcast, we would really appreciate if you would subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We really do appreciate you being a listener. And as always, I like to end with a quote, and today's quote comes from Tim Keller, and I love this. He said, "The world says you are loved because of what you do. Jesus says you can now do all things because you are loved." And I thought that was so fitting giving Sarah's interview. And I'm so glad that that's the culture that they try to create in their church. Thanks for listening and being part of L3 Leadership. My wife Laura and I appreciate you so much, and we'll talk to you next episode.